and welcome to FL Studio. This is my project for Lost in the Rhythm 2019 update. If you want to listen to the track in full and the remixes, it's in the description. So for this tutorial, a few people have asked me about doing walkthroughs and talking about track structure and things like that. So I thought the best thing to do would be to go through a track which I've recently released, and it also gave me an opportunity to just tidy the project up a bit as well. My projects aren't always this tidy, but for the purpose of the tutorial, I thought it was best to sort of tidy it up a little bit. What I'm not going to do is go really in depth on stuff that I've already talked about in my tutorials, so I'm going to skim over those, and I'm really conscious of this being like ridiculously long, so I might just kind of just save time, skim over a few bits, but if you've got any questions on anything at all, feel free to ask me, and I'll reply in the comments section. So yeah, most of what I'm going to be talking about is kind of like how I got to the decisions I made around the arrangement and the kind of vibe I wanted to get from the track. With making this, I was really conscious of kind of not straying too far from my original version, which I made in 2017. I wanted to kind of keep a fairly similar vibe. So with that in mind, I did feel slightly kind of more, I felt slightly more restricted than I would do if I was just making an original track off the bat, because I felt that people would kind of anticipate certain elements of the track. So yeah, without further ado, let's jump in and have a look at the project from start to finish. So starting with the intro, I mean, it's fairly standard really. One thing that I just wanted to sort of say, which I do tend to do in tracks, but not all of them, is I've used a different kick than I have used in the drop, which is a lot harder, and that just kind of felt that for the intro it didn't really merit a kind of tough kick like that. So yeah, like I said, it's fairly standard really. You've got the talk, the kind of like attack of a raw style kick sitting on top of the kick, and that's pretty consistent throughout the track actually, so I felt necessary to put that in the intro. On top of that, I've got some drums, a few claps, sat on the kick just to fill it out a bit. And then after 8 bars, a snare roll comes in to kind of build it up for the breakdown. So when you're mixing it, you kind of hear that come in, which is why that is there, along with some effects as well. Riser. And then some hardstyle kicks. I think my final mix on this was in stems, and there were some things that I cut out. So on my stem mix, I cut the reverb tails out of these kicks, and the talk kind of goes into like a roll as well. So yeah, if you're kind of new to producing music, usually like a track would have an intro there for the DJ to be able to mix it, although there does seem to be more tracks with much shorter intros, 8 bars or even none at all. I do like to kind of put a 16-bar intro just because I play my own songs out. 16 for a track like this would be necessary. I mean, any longer, and I just don't think there's any point for this style of track anyway. So yeah, into the breakdown. I wanted to give a really atmospheric vibe. My original version of this was kind of quite atmospheric at the start, and I wanted to make sure that I kind of kept that vibe. So the main thing that kind of gives that here was the bass and the sub pad. The Reese is a serum pad, which if you've got my pack, that's in there. It's the Lost in the Rhythm pad. That's just one I made. And that kind of does the job really well when everything else is there. And also another thing as well, which was in the original, was the art, and I wanted to keep that because that was a kind of something I really liked. So that comes in straight off the bat with a really heavily reverbed vocal. If I show you the reverb on that. That's the reverb on that section there. So it's like fully wet, not much dry. Loads and loads of decay on there just to give it a really atmospheric effect. If I take that off, it just sounds like a... Something else that helped give this track a kind of atmospheric feel was pitching the vocal down from, I think it was a G originally, from wherever I got it from, and so I pitched it down to a D. I think it's a D sharp. I should know this. So yeah, pitching the vocal down to a D sharp also gave the track a really nice atmospheric feel as well. High string, which I bounced down. That's from Contact. And something which I added, which wasn't in the original version of this piano. Contact. If you've got Contact complete, then that's just a setting from the Giant. As I said, I'm not going to go really in depth in like every kind of like synth patch I've used, but I will talk through and I can answer any questions. So yeah, the track kind of, it progresses through. As you can tell, you've got just the synth and the piano. Now the pads come in with the vocal, and that's layered up. I think that is, so it's a fairly like dark progression. I didn't want the track to sound too happy. I think that's pad there. 4 layers, and then the strings are Contact. Also, another thing I've used throughout is like remnants of the lead, just to give a bit more atmosphere. Use some audio, and I do this in all my tracks. I really like kind of just adding bits like that in. And that leads into the main riff. I rewrote this for this version. The original 2017 one wasn't really catchy enough, I don't think. It was good at the time, but I wanted to write something that was slightly more catchy and had a bit more of like a kind of hard styly sound, whereas and just cut through the mix a little bit. So this is just one. I think this is just one lead sound. And I've opened the cutoff there at the end of every 4 bars, just to kind of make it a little bit more interesting. And after that, the big kind of synths come in here. So this kind of section was in the original as well. Something else I didn't want to not have in it, because I felt people would kind of expect that, because that was in the original version. As you can see here, the chords are basically made up of quite a few different layers. Same as my tutorial, if you've seen that. Nothing special there. But if you listen to it on its own, this is what it sounds like. If I take the chords out the bottom, just doesn't sound fat or big enough. It's really simple. Like, it's not really anything complicated about that at all. It just works really well as a kind of call and response. Also in my tracks, or for this one particularly, I think I've used like quite a lot of effects and whooshes, and something I find when I get sent a lot of music is I don't always get, sometimes the breakdowns feel a little bit empty, and I think just as an example, you know, like adding like a whoosh, a couple of bits there, impact, kind of really have an effect on that part of the track. Having the crashes there. And a lot of stuff I get sent maybe doesn't have enough sweeps, crashes and impacts and things like that in the breakdown, which I think are really, really cool. I mean, every big sample pack has tons of these. So I just say to people to, like, you know, go to town on it, I guess. Okay, onto the build-up, which is one of my favourite elements of the track. Because I felt it was like really wanted to be like quite high energy. That was something I wanted to kind of get across before the drop. So it's a couple of snare rolls. One's just a loop, which I found and liked. Quite often I'll drop things in, switch them out, but in this case I guess it just works. So I've actually muted my own ones there. And on top of that, there's lots of risers and effects here, as you can see. So there's the risers from the intro also present here as well. And one of the main things about the build-up, which gave it the energy, is the chords here. Without them, it just sounds really dead. That version there, that's the version from my original, that's the audio from my original version of Lost in the Rhythm, which I really like the sound of, so I've layered that as well. I forgot to mention that. Okay, so onto the drop. And the drop consists of a kind of rolling bass line and a few other layers of audio as well. I've used some reverse bass kicks just to fill it out. There's tons of stuff here. Although the main layer by a long shot that is contact layer, which I think is a psytrance bass. Serum, one of my bass lines, and Massive, which is just a white noise sound, which is this on its own. Kind of gives it a shuffly groove effect. And then the big kick comes in with the top. I tried a few different kick drums. I think I made one in there, but to be honest with you, like the big kind of UK hardcore kick just really worked well for this track and this bass. It's quite a minimal drop, so there's not really any percussion. There's a small closed hat which runs across the drop. As you can see, as the drop progresses, I add elements of drums and percussion in. So for the first 8 bars, it's just that standard clap and closed hat, and then it progresses to a kind of drop clap, and then for the last part there's also a ride and a clap and a snare as well. And another main part of this drop is obviously the screeches, which is this section here, and it's an absolute mess. And they sound like this. Loads of reverb to kind of fill out the drop. Oh. As you can see, there's lots of bits there that didn't quite make the cut. I think I switched bits on, off, until I made a decision out of how I wanted to kind of like drop to sound. In the end, I went for a slightly more minimal version of the kind of what I had in mind, but it just seemed to work. Other than that, really, it's like I say, it's quite a basic drop. There's white noise following right the way through as well, which also fills it out. That's great on drops. I don't know if that's something people were aware of, but I don't do this in every track. But for something with a kind of minimal drop, I think it helps to fill out some of the frequencies there. Also, I've got loads of fills, so to kind of keep the track consistent, interesting and exciting, I've added in the some of the chords from the breakdown and the vocal, and here as well. I have to use a different sound card when I'm talking on the mic, so unfortunately it's going to be a little bit glitchy compared to when I'm doing my projects. Yes, that's the main elements really. I originally went for a 16-bar drop. It felt like way too short with this, especially with the kind of fills. Especially with the fills as well, 16 bars just felt too short for the drop, so I added an extra 8 bars in as a kind of like, I don't know really, more of a kind of part to mix out on, so there's a riser as well. Without them, it feels like pretty dead. Yeah, and thing is, like, it's when I was doing the drop, I mean, any longer than that felt too long, but 16 bars felt like it wasn't enough. So I think something that you know, it's worth taking into consideration is kind of like the length of modern dance tracks and how people's attention spans are on the dance floor. And I think 24 for this track felt like spot on. The original I think was 32, but I tried that and it just didn't feel right. So this kind of kept the track moving. And then in the second breakdown, I've kind of switched up. I've got the same vibe, kind of wanted to go for something atmospheric still, but not copy what I'd done in the first breakdown at all. So the piano comes straight in off the bat with the Reese, the sub, the high string, and the heavily reverbed. So my idea with the second breakdown was to kind of switch it up completely. I didn't really want to repeat the chords that I had earlier on in the track here because they're in the drop as well, and it just felt like I was going to be doing it a bit too much. So I wanted to make the second breakdown completely different from the first and to make the track a lot more interesting. So I extended it by bringing the piano in on the full melody with the vocal and the pads. That high string, like, there's something about putting a string on a single note which just gives like such an awesome kind of feeling of atmosphere in a track. And it's quite quiet in the mix, but okay. And then it kind of starts to build back up again. I bring the melody in, similar as before, but the filter cut off slightly different this time. So you can see here I've kind of brought it up here. I've left it quite low for it to come in and gradually build up as the track builds up. Just going to show you the processing on the melody, which is a kind of Code Black style, modern hardstyle kind of lead. It's that one there. So there's quite a lot going on there with that. Inflator, there's reverb delay, OTT is kind of giving it the compression, and there's some EQ points as well there just to like bring out the high end. And that's kind of it on that, really. It's nothing like too spectacular on that sound. So into the second build up, it's a bit more I guess it's slightly more tame than the first one. Again, I want it to be slightly different, but then the drop's totally different. So it's almost like people are anticipating the same drop, but it's not. So this build up, I wanted to kind of have a different vibe to it as well. Yeah, so it's a much more stripped back build up. So for the second drop, I've gone down the route of like a big hardstyle kick to kind of switch it up. With the screeches coming at you kind of a little bit more consistently than in the first drop, so it's less minimal in that respect. The layers are pretty much just the same kick as the first drop. That's kind of the driving layer. That's what gives it the energy. Without that, it really just lacks it. That's the sub coming through. Another kind of gritty layer. They're both equally as important. Like, every single layer in here is doing something to fill out the frequency range and to make sure that this drop is kind of booming in all the right places. So on the main bass, there's just quite a bit of distortion decapitator on there, which is really good for kind of just bringing out some frequencies. And then onto the screeches on here, which I wanted to show you guys. If I take off the effects, these screeches are absolutely pathetic. Yeah, so with that, loads and loads of distortion, some really harsh EQ. Yeah, and a huge reverb on there, and that reverb is also filtered out as well. Ooh. So I could have gone straight back into that kind of hard side drop, but it would have made the track a little bit boring, I think. So I think adding a second drop just makes it a lot more interesting on the dance floor. You know, if you kind of got, I know a dance track's quite repetitive, but I just for me it needed to be different, to be exciting and interesting. And a lot of kind of hard dance tracks out there now have 2 different drops. So my next move was kind of how I was gonna finish the track, and it felt like the best thing to do was to, rather than have like just a simple outro, was to have the hard side, the first drop, kind of come back in. But this time it comes in without any screeches, and it comes in with the that really heavily reverbed vocal to kind of give it some atmosphere as the track like draws out. So this would be, if you're not familiar with DJing, then this would be where you generally like mix out of a track. So so that's kind of why it's more minimal than other areas of the track, like the drop. And again with this, same with this drop, the white noise runs right the way through, and the riser is there just to kind of see out that section of the track. And that vocal was taken out of the end of the original one there, which kind of just was a nice ending to the track. So yeah, that's kind of it really. Like I said, I didn't want to go like massively in depth on everything and then end up being like a 2-hour long video. I thought like 30 minutes roughly would kind of 25-30 minutes would kind of suffice. But if there's any like stuff you want to ask me, then go ahead and we can create like a bit of a discussion in the comments. If there's anything you're not sure about or anything I could have gone in more in depth about, feel free to let me know, and I may do one of these again at some point. It's just a case of knowing which track to do really, because a lot of my projects are really messy. But yeah, hopefully that's kind of just an insight really. I wanted to give you guys an insight into how I build a track and make decisions around track structure and things like that, and layering, so you can see everything there. And it's probably not much difference of stuff you've seen in other tutorials or stuff you do yourself really. Everything is obviously, like I've spoke about a lot of the things with pads, chords, bass and everything in my tutorials, which is why I haven't gone in depth in this one. So yeah, hopefully that's cool guys. And if you want to hear the EP and the remixes from Relect, I'll Be Loud and Rico Defect and Stu Infinity, then drop that's in the comments. And also if you want my serum pack for Serum, which is out now, I'll leave a link for that in the comments as well. So thank you everybody for listening once again. Tell your friends, subscribe, and I'll see you again soon. Bye.